And hold one sec, Counselor. I just want to make sure you guys are on YouTube.
All right, thank you.
It says it, but I just like to confirm. And we are good. Go ahead.
Thank you, Joe.
Hmm.
All right, at 5:01, we are calling to order the October 7th meeting of the Quality of Life Committee. And if we could get a roll call, that'd be great.
Councillor Michael Garcia.
Present.
Councillor Jamie Cassett Sanchez.
Jamie's excused.
Okay. Councillor Chris Rivera.
Here.
Councilwoman Renee Villarreal.
Did you say councilwoman? Present.
I did say councilwoman. And Chair Romero Worth.
Yes, I am here. Okay, with that, are there changes to the agenda from staff?
No.
Other changes from anyone else? If there are no changes, is there a motion to approve?
Move for approval.
Second.
If you could call the roll again, or not the roll, but you know what I mean.
I got you. Councillor Chris Rivera.
Yes.
Councilwoman Renee Villarreal.
Yes.
Councillor Michael Garcia.
Yes.
And Chair Romero Worth.
Yes. All right, so with the approval of the agenda, we will move to the consent agenda. Are there items that the committee would like to discuss? Councillor Garcia.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to remove items A and D. D is in dog.
A and D. Okay. Anything else? All right. Do we have a motion to approve the consent agenda as amended?
Move to approve as amended.
Second.
And can we call the roll again, Jennifer?
Councilwoman Renee Villarreal.
Yes.
Councillor Michael Garcia.
Yes.
Councillor Chris Rivera.
Yes.
And Chair Carol Romero Worth.
Yes. All right, we need a motion. Well, are there changes to the minutes from September 16th? Seeing none, is there a motion to approve the minutes from September 16th?
For approval.
Second.
Is there a second? We have a motion and a second. Can we call the roll on the minutes approval?
Councillor Michael Garcia.
Yes.
Councillor Chris Rivera.
Yes.
Councilwoman Renee Villarreal.
Yes.
Chair Romero Worth.
Yes. All right, with that, we will move to the first item that was pulled from consent. Councillor Garcia, we have item A, I think was the first one you pulled.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just got a quick question. Does this only pertain to SFPD, or how does it affect state police, county sheriff's office, and any U.S. Police enforcement, whether it be U.S. Marshals, FBI, whatever it may be?
Chief Padilla, or no?
There.
Okay, thank you, Captain.
So, yeah, Deputy Chief Paul Joey, Councilor Garcia, to answer that question, this would pertain only to Santa Fe Police Department. This is an ordinance that would affect our agency, but it also prohibits us from participating in the execution of a no-knock search warrant that hypothetically were one to be approved for another agency. We would not participate.
Okay. What is the process, I mean, for us to not approve any no-knock warrants in general? So that is covered in this proposal, is that correct? So there wouldn't even be one issued. Am I wrong in understanding that?
So, Councilor Garcia, members of the committee, I think I'm understanding you correctly. I'll I'll rephrase. This basically prohibits our agency from being able to acquire a no-knock search warrant to execute within the city limits.
Okay, and so I guess my follow-up, and I definitely understood that, Deputy Chief Joy. So thank you for the clarification. But I guess my kind of further question is, are we going to prohibit the issuance of no-knock warrants in general? That way, county, state, or federal law enforcement couldn't apply for that. And does this pertain to that?
So, Councilor Garcia, members of the committee, we don't have that authority. It's generally issued by a judge or a court. And so we as an agency in a city ordinance can't prohibit a court from being able to issue such a search warrant.
Okay.
What this does is it prohibits us as an agency from participating in or seeking the execution of this type of search warrant.
Okay. Is Mayor Weber on by chance?
I don't believe he is.
I am.
Oh, I don't see
Hey,
him.
Mayor.
But I've been trying not to interfere with your committee, so
Oh, there you are. Oh, sorry, didn't see you there.
I'm only
I just
here.
got to,
I'm only here
Sorry, Mayor, go ahead.
by the virtue of your chair letting me be here. That's all.
so I guess as the sponsor, I guess the question more so pertains to you. Were you solely trying to limit the engagement of SFPD or engagement across all law enforcement spectrum?
Thank you for the question. I think my intent after looking at what we've seen around the country was to make sure that as far as we were concerned as a jurisdiction and as a police department, our policies would be preventing tragedies from happening, and that we would have a clear statement of our own way of doing business as a police department and as a city. So I did not intend that we could or should extend our authority outside our own jurisdiction, but I would hope that we would want to be on the side of protecting people from this kind of use of this kind of a warrant.
Okay. I mean, given that we, within our own police force, haven't used this in many years, do we know how often it's been used in general by other law enforcement agencies?
You'd have to defer. I'd have to defer to people who have more knowledge of other law enforcement agencies.
Well,
Should the judge be able to answer that? And sorry, Deputy Chief, didn't mean to interrupt.
I can jump in a little bit. Councilor Garcia, members of the committee, I reached out to the New Mexico Law Enforcement Academy, who obviously is the certifying agency for all of our law enforcement certifications. The attorney who teaches the law block and case law said basically, to his understanding, he couldn't give me an exact date, but basically as a state, it's been roughly 20 years since an agency in the state has sought the execution of a no-knock search warrant specifically.
Okay. No, thank you for the clarification. I think that helps. I just wanted to make sure we weren't missing anything. If we were having a lot of requests come in potentially from federal law enforcement or state, and if we're missing that, then I think we should make that part of this legislation, or at least I would ask the sponsor we'd look into that. That's all the questions I have. Oh, the only other thing is I'd like to be added as a co-sponsor to this.
Great.
And that's all I have, Madam Chair.
Madam Chair, could I just add one? It's always better to shut up after people are happy, but I did want to just clarify one point. There is as you could imagine, Councilor Garcia, the U.S. Conference of Mayors and other city organizations have been looking in detail at public safety and police department policies. And so the derivation of this was my reading up on these other recommendations from national organizations and mayors organizations about things that will put us in line with best practice. And I don't think our department has been utilizing this tool, but I think we can put ourselves in a position where we're assuring people that as a community, we get the concern that's been expressed nationally, and we want to be following best practice as advised by U.S. Conference of Mayors, police advisors, and others. So that's really the derivation. Thank you for the chance to clarify.
I think you're on mute, Madam Chair.
Oops, I'm muted. Deputy Chief, sorry, I called you a captain. I know better than that. And I should have called you chief. You know, you always aim higher than you should. So sorry about that. We will now go to Councilor Rivera, has a question or two.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Deputy Chief Joy, clearly we don't have any jurisdiction or authority outside the city limits. Is that correct?
Councilor Rivera, members of the committee, that is correct. And again, what this would allow us is if a federal agency or a state agency or a county agency were to seek the execution of this type of warrant and we're going to request our assistance, we would be prohibited by this ordinance from participating in such a thing.
Okay, so that leads to my next question. If we were going to do not a no-knock, but just a simple going into a residence, and we invited other jurisdictions to come in and they felt like it should be a no-knock, could they then decide not to participate?
Councilor Rivera and members of the committee, assuming I understand the question correctly, if they had a disagreement about the status or the nature of the warrant that we were going to get, it would be within their purview to not participate if they didn't want to. We can't compel another agency to participate in our warrant.
And then I think you touched on it, but vice versa, if the FBI came in and they had a no-knock warrant, I heard you say that we would be prohibited to participate in that, but they could still follow through with their no-knock warrant within the city limits. And what agencies does that stop at? Is it just federal? Is it if the county or state decided to issue a no warrant or a no-knock warrant within the city limits, they would have to do that without support of city police, but they could still do it?
That is correct.
Okay. That's all I wanted to know. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions from the committee? Seeing none, what is the pleasure of the
Do I
committee?
have my hand up?
Yeah, your hand was up, but then it went down.
It disappeared. Well,
Sorry, go ahead, Counselor.
actually, Councilor Rivera asked the same question I had. So if it was another jurisdiction, they could still issue that kind of warrant even without our participation, is what I hear. Is that correct, Deputy Chief Joy?
Yes, Councilor Villarreal, that is correct, just by the nature of the search warrants themselves, but assuming they go through district court for the search warrant, which is kind of standard practice, it's a district court order allowing the search and whatever parameters outlined in the search. But we as an agency would not be participating in the execution of that warrant.
Okay, thank you for that. And I guess I also want to be a co-sponsor for this, and I think it is a proactive approach, even though we haven't had this practice in play for, you said 10 years. So I think we need to keep going with that, and this will probably be a proactive way to approach that. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions from the committee? What is the pleasure of the committee?
Move to approve.
We have a motion and a second to approve this item. Jennifer, can you call the roll?
Councillor Chris Rivera,
Yes.
Councilwoman Renee Villarreal,
Yes,
Councillor Michael Garcia,
Yes.
and Chair Carol Romero Worth.
Yes. All right, with that, we will move, hold on, gotta get PrimeGov to cooperate with me. To the, sorry. To the next item that was pulled from the agenda, which is item D, request for approval of a lease agreement between the City of Santa Fe and the Interfaith Community Shelter Group. Councillor Garcia pulled this item, and I just want to take this opportunity to highlight that the Quality of Life Committee was created to give this kind of an issue a platform to be discussed. And so tonight, not only are we talking about this lease, but I think we're talking about the issue of homelessness in the city and the kinds of things that the city is doing to address this issue, and how the Interfaith Community Shelter fits into our strategies to address homelessness in the city. And so I am very interested in this presentation or conversation. We started it at Finance Committee Monday night, and this is exactly the kind of conversation that this committee was developed so that we could bring the kind of more context, more substance to the surface about our overall strategy. So for me, this is not just about this lease, but it's about what we do with regard to the issue in general. So thank you everyone for being here. And Councilor Garcia, I believe you pulled this.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you for Joe and Dan for being here as well. I think we can all agree that the services provided by the shelter are critical, and it's the impact that it has on the community is positive. And I want to applaud you, Joe, and Dan and your board of directors for the continuous support that you provide those folks that are most in need in our community. So thank you for that. It's unattested. I do have some questions though in regards just to logistical stuff, and so I guess these are more so for Dan and Joe, Madam Chair. So I don't know if I can get permission to ask them questions, or if I should ask them to Andrea and Rich, and they can refer them to our guests.
No, I think you can ask directly. They were invited here again to give more context to not only this lease, but I think we have another guest here that may be able to help us with some of the strategies that we're employing toward this issue. I also just, if you are not here for this item, if you could turn your video off, that would be great. Apparently we're having a YouTube issue. So I just want to mention that. So anyway, thank you.
Okay, thank you for the clarification, Madam Chair. So as I mentioned, the shelter has been successful, and we want to ensure that there's success in the future. And so with that, my questions more so pertain around sustainability and what those plans for sustainability are, and what that looks like, and what your plans are for 4 years down the road, maybe 10 years down the road. I don't know if you have them. 20 years down the road, what's your ultimate goal? What's the impact you want to have? What's the legacy of the shelter you want to have on our community? So with that, I know the lease that's currently in front of us is for 4 years. And so my question is, what is next after 4 years? Should this come before us again? What is the next steps?
Who would you like to have answer that, Councilor Garcia?
Dan, feel free, or Joe, chime in.
Okay.
I think you all are best equipped to answer that question. I just want to kind of learn more about the next steps, because as I mentioned, are we going to, in 4 years, have this come in front of us again and say we would like to renew the space for another 4 years? Or is there other grandiose plans that in 4 years you're saying, thanks for letting us use the space, but we've been working towards looking at occupying a new space, and it's been a great partnership, but this is where we're heading. And I just wanted a little more context and background maybe into that.
Thank you, Madam Counselor Chair, and Counselor Garcia. The shelter has always been a partnership. This shelter has always been a partnership with the city. It was born about 12 years ago when the city suffered a large number of deaths of homeless people from hypothermia. And I was one of the organizers with several of the other faith communities in the city to come to the city and say, look, this is a city problem, and we're willing to staff this thing if you'll give us a place to be, because we had spent a lot of time every summer trying to find a new place. The city then spent a year looking for an appropriate location for this place. And the city finally settled on Pete's Place for several reasons. One was the size of the place and the fact that we could renovate it the way it had to be, and we were going to pay for conduct the renovations. They liked the location on major bus routes, so it was accessible to homeless people and it was not outside the city. It was highly desirable for the police and fire department. They both weighed in very strongly that they liked this location. They can get there quickly. They can take care of whatever needs to be done there, and they know where we are. And the fourth was the proximity to other services for homeless people, Lifelink, other kinds of provisions of food and medical care. And when the city placed the shelter, bought Pete's Place and turned it over to us to renovate it and run it, the city needed to anticipate the impact of the shelter's location on businesses and the neighbors. And it needed to address that from the outset. But the city didn't do that. And a series of complaints followed over time. And we have repeatedly met with the neighbors and with the city to try to address these problems. And we've done a great deal to try to address these problems so far. We've put cameras capturing what happens on and off the property, including on Harrison and Jorgensen, as requested by the neighbors. We've attended many meetings with the city and with neighbors. We pick up the trash around the entire block every day. We provide day services to try to ameliorate the needs of and rehabilitate homeless people. The shelter hired a person with both case management and security capabilities as requested by the city. Shelter staff is accessible to neighbors and is very responsive to their requests. The shelter erected a solid fence on Jorgensen as requested by neighbors. The shelter enclosed the entire property on Harrison with a chain link fence and razor wire to discourage loitering. The shelter put up no loitering and no trespassing signs all over the property as recommended by the police department. The shelter increased outdoor lighting, including on Harrison and Jorgensen Street. The shelter moved the needle exchange off our location to a location blocks away down Rufina Street. The shelter constructed a metal awning to protect guests from the elements as a way of encouraging guests allowed to stay on the property to stay off the street and come on and be sheltered. We've cooperated with all requests for information from the Santa Fe Police Department and other law enforcement agencies. We have a policy of returning people from whence they came, usually out of state, if they have a family or friend to go to. But we do not send people to other shelters. We're trying to lessen the burden on the city and the county. We are a shelter of last resort. We are a no conditions shelter. We are the bottom of the city's safety net. Where will we be in 4 years? That will depend entirely on the success of the mayor's and the city's efforts in terms of Build for Zero and their other efforts for housing people in housing where they can get supported services and move on. We see about a little over 1,000 people every winter. And Councilor Garcia, I would say out of that 1,000, it's maybe about 120 who are really the chronically homeless. These are people who have severe mental health problems, have substance use problems, or are just so totally lost they don't want to move on. Will we ever provide enough services so those people do not need the winter shelter? The answer to you is I hope so. But having been working in this area for 12 years, and Joe has been working in this area for over 30, I'm not sure they're ever going to be suitable for the kinds of housing that the mayor is and the city is hoping to create. We originally asked for, I want to correct something said to either the council or the finance committee, I don't remember which, but we originally, the shelter had a 10-year lease with the city with 3-year checkouts. And we proposed to the city a 9-year lease with 2 optional renewals. The city came back and said, no, we're trying to standardize all of our leases at 4 years. Let's do a 4-year lease. And we thought about that. And I want to say that a 4-year lease is the minimum term that I think we can support, because we have grants that currently are running for more than 4 years that we already have. We need to show stability when applying for new funding, and we are largely funded out of individual donations and private grants. In hiring and retaining qualified staff, you've got to promise some kind of longevity. Otherwise, good people aren't going to want to work with us. We need to assure our guests that we're going to be there. Guests are already saying to us, and we call the homeless people who stay at the shelter guests. These folks are already saying to us, we hear you're going to close. Where are we going to go? What's going to happen to us? Stability is important for these people's mental health and resilience, and for the organization that supports them, the Interfaith Community Shelter Group. And so where will we be at the end of 4 years? I think we are going to be where we are now. It's possible that the city's efforts will be sufficiently successful that we can not be housing 120 people a night pre-COVID, and that, but we'll be there for the people who absolutely have nowhere else to go. No one else will take them. We were asked the other day in finance, several counselors said, well, we don't hear any problems about St. E's. Why is that? Well, it's easy to tell you why that is. St. E's has a series of requirements before you can get into their shelter. They're not a shelter of last resort. They are not the bottom of the safety net. They skim off the people who they can move on. And second of all, their shelter's tiny compared to ours. So I don't have a crystal ball, but I'm fairly sure that the city is going to need some kind of baseline shelter for people who can't make it anywhere else. We don't have a stake in this. We are a collection of faith communities, and we have a small staff. We run largely on 2,000 volunteers a year who come to the shelter and provide service and food. And our staff is very small. Our administrative overhead is shockingly small compared to almost any other C3 nonprofit I'm aware of. Will we, but one thing that I will hope that actually changes is that I hope that we can improve the situation in our neighborhood. We want to be a good neighbor. We care about those people as much as any of you do. It's just that our authority is limited to the property we occupy. We have no authority in the street. We have no authority down the street. We have sought repeatedly, and we've brainstormed with the city and with the neighbors. And over these many years, we have sought city lighting and sidewalks on Harrison Street, which may finally be coming now, but I've heard that before. I think lighting and sidewalks would help a lot. We're now hearing that there will be increased community policing on Harrison. That will be enormously important. We heard from Kira Ochoa the other night, a wonderful array of behavioral support services with the fire department and MIHO and other providers to provide the kinds of services that our guests and the people who are, most of the people, by the way, who are causing problems on Harrison Street are not shelter guests. They're not allowed on the shelter because they don't behave on the shelter either when they're in the shelter. And so they're not allowed in, and we have no jurisdiction over them when they're on Harrison. But they have serious problems, often drug problems. The city could, with enough services, take care of that so that there isn't a problem. And if there were a regular police presence, I think that these folks would find somewhere else to be. We actively work with the police department, with the fire department, MIHO, and Lifelink's street outreach team to identify those individuals on Harrison and get them the assistance they need.
Mr. Yohalam, I think we've moved away from the answer to the question. And again, we don't have endless time tonight. So I'm going to cut you off and ask that Councilor Garcia continue with his questions. We do
Thank
have
you.
another presentation, and I think some of the information that you're talking about is valuable, and I think may come out with other questions being asked. So if you don't mind,
Thank you.
I'd like Councilor Garcia to continue.
Thank you.
And thank you, Mr. Yohalam. And you bring up a great point of the success, as you say, of this partnership relies on a lot on the city. So I guess maybe, Kara, what do you see in 4 years? What's the plan? What's the sustainability plan for this? Because if Mr. Yohalam's correct, then what on our end are we looking at? Because in 4 years, if we're so lucky to have you still with us with the city, are you going to come in front of us saying we need to renew the lease, or is there bigger plans? Because as we know, COVID has impacted the way services are provided, and the demand definitely out meets the supply we currently have and with the services we can provide. And so are we looking at meeting that demand and continuing the partnership with the shelter? And what does that look like?
Madam Chair, Councilor Garcia, thank you for the question. I don't think that any of us knows exactly what the future holds, and the question of whether there'll always be a need for this shelter is a really interesting one. And I think that tonight we have someone with us that has founded the Built for Zero movement and is the founder of Community Solutions. Roseanne Haggerty is with us. And I can say a little bit to your question, but I'd love Ms. Haggerty to be able to talk about what she's seen around at other communities. But in terms of our plan, in terms of how we meet the city's obligation to be a partner with the shelter, which we very much want to be and are. You've heard at the Finance Committee meeting, Chief Padilla announced the community policing effort that will be going on around the shelter, and that's key. I think that'll be very good. I think we also have, as I mentioned at Finance on the other night, a plan underway to really get into coordinated street outreach so that the people who are on the streets, who are really even beyond being able to be helped at Pete's, can forge relationships with people that can get them connected to behavioral health services and other services they might need. That's the missing link that we've really had here in Santa Fe and that we've been struggling with. And so we have a lot of irons in the fire about how to make that coordinated street outreach happen. And that will serve not just the area around Pete's, but the entire city with people that are not even accessing these our emergency shelters. So that's a key piece of the puzzle. I think we've said last time we're asking too much of Pete's, and we need to continue to create relief valves for Pete's so that Pete's can be what it is, which is an emergency shelter that prevents hypothermia deaths, not a de facto mental health institution, for example, or a long-term stay for some people that have certain, for women, for example, who are now staying year-round or had been. So we need to look at how to bolster other parts of the services system with permanent supportive housing, with transitional permanent supportive housing. That might be a complement to the county's crisis center. That's another project we've got underway. And then, I think that we're looking at a long-term strategic plan, and we have put a stake in the ground that we want to end chronic homelessness. Now, chronic homelessness is defined as people being homeless for 12 months or more, essentially. And as Mr. Yohalam mentioned, that might be about 120 people out of the 1,000 that come through Pete's. So that isn't going to relieve every need that Pete's is serving, but it will take care of housing some people and getting them stabilized in a way that will help relieve pressure on what's happening inside and perhaps outside of Pete's as well. I hope that answers your question a little bit. And
it does, and thank you. And I think what I'm learning from this is that we need to work closely with Joe and Dan to develop what this plan is, and bring in maybe Miss Haggerty and start establishing some type of strategic plan, some sustainability plan, because I think it's necessary. And so I don't want to continue on this. I know our time is limited because I do have one other question. And so thank you, Kara, I really appreciate it. So I know that there's been a lot of discussion around what is the responsibility of the shelter in regards to just being a great neighbor. I know it's been stated that it's, the shelter has only so much authority beyond its boundaries. But in some instances, how would we as a city, whether it is a private residence or a business that is becoming, bringing somewhat nuisance activities to the neighborhood, how would we work to remedy the issue? And I don't know if that's a question for the police force or who, because I know, in one day's finance meeting, it was, there was over 500 calls to the shelter or surrounding area this year, just for the police force, and nearly 200 for our fire department folks. And so I'm just immediately thinking we want to ensure that the community is safe, but how would we try to remedy the issue if it wasn't the shelter? Let's say it was another business that was causing unwanted activities in the area. I know if it was a house, for example, we have the nuisance ordinance, and there's so many things that can happen before we take that proactive action against the homeowner. And I don't know if there's the same actions for a business, but I guess ultimately it does come down to, I think the responsibility does lie a little more with the entity. And if that falls on us as if we're partners, how do we begin to remedy the issue? Because I think it's also evident and clear by just the outreach of the community that there need to be some changes made. And so I guess this is a question for Joe or Dan. What kind of conversations are held? What kind of information is provided to guests in regards to, if we can't take you in tonight, please don't go out in the community and do X, Y, and Z? What kind of proactive measures are taken? Because I think when, especially when COVID hit, folks were used to going to the shelter, and then there was a capacity issue. And so those folks that couldn't utilize the facilities were unfortunately put at Midtown, a hotel, or elsewhere. And so I don't know what kind of good neighborly tactics does the shelter take in regards to, look, we want to ensure that our guests are clear that the shelter does not condone, going out and doing drugs in a homeowner's yard, or doing everything that us counselors have received via email. I mean, we've seen some pretty grotesque pictures and heard grotesque stories of some of the actions that they've been engaged in. And I think we need to ensure that we're trying to remedy the situation.
Joe,
And
can you answer that?
Sure. First of all, Counselor, Madam Chair, I just want everybody to know that every person who enters the shelter for an overnight stay signs a contract with us, what we're providing them and what we expect in return for their behavior, just so you know that. But we really work actively, our case manager, myself, or administrative assistant, we are out on that street with some frequency, real frequency, encouraging people to move, telling them that their behavior is a reflection of the shelter, that and that, if you don't alter your behavior and move, what's going to happen is the shelter is going to be shut down for everybody, and stuff like that. We clean the street, not just to go around on a daily basis, but we clean the street after we ask people to move. I've had my staff power wash across the street where people were camping out and creating problems and leaving behind, feces and stuff like that. I had my staff out there. We rented power washes. We just cleaned that whole area out. But we are always actively working to move people on, or to encourage those who are out there who belong, who can be on the property, to come onto the property. And in part, when Dan mentioned the metal awning that we created with heaters and lights and everything else, that in part was, of course, an effort to help keep the guests protected during the winter months, but it is also an effort, particularly in the summer, to provide them with shade and cooling, which there is none on the street really, or in the parking lot, so that they would be encouraged to stay on the property. So, Councilor,
in addition, Councilor, we have porta potties, and I insist that the vast majority of the problem on Harrison Street is not people who stay at the shelter.
right.
The people who stay at the shelter come to the shelter for resource services, and Councilor Renee Villarreal, I can see, is nodding her head, and we agree on this. I mean, the problem is a bunch of people who are hovering nearby, and by creating a covered space for the entrance and heating it and the awning, I mean, we are gathering the people who belong in the shelter off the street and onto our property. That's what we do. And we talk to them about their behavior, and they sign a contract. And I mean, I think we're trying to make good citizens out of them. And I think everybody would agree that's not the problem. The problem is a group of other people and what they do a block and a half away from the shelter. And it's really difficult to tell you that, there's something we can do, Councilor Garcia, we the shelter, about that. I think it takes our providing the information. We know those people. We have given the police the information about them. We've given the behavioral health people their information. We'll do everything we can to help the city's resources deal with them. We want to be good neighbors, but I don't think that our shelter guests are the problem.
And I'm sorry if I was implying that it was the guests. I think, the services being provided attract a certain clientele. And that's why I gave the example, if it was let's say if it was a bar, for example, and the bar was attracting patrons that were rowdy every Friday and Saturday night. And once they got out of the bar, they were going down the street, breaking windows. And how can we be proactive and ensure that we are working with the folks that are in the surrounding areas to either provide them support and assistance, that way we can get them off the street as well, or help to educate that, hey, look, this is the wrong place to be doing whatever it is that's not wanted in those areas. And I think, I understand what you're saying in regards to you can only control what's within your boundaries, but I guess I'm more so looking for recommendations, how we can maybe, if it's developing a program where it's a community stewardship program where we have active volunteers that might go out to help these individuals that might not be guests of the space, but they're actively supporting the folks in the community as well. So I don't know, do you think that might help?
I think that's an excellent idea, Counselor. And I think that Kira has spoken before about trying to get more people with mental health background and social work background on the street, dealing with some of these people. I just want to do a footnote for a second, and maybe it's just the lawyer in me. A nuisance is where it's something we're doing. I mean, we're not getting people drunk and sending them out on the street. That's a nuisance. We're not doing something to these people and then they go on the street and they cause a nuisance. That would be a nuisance. That's not it. We're running a tight ship. The problem is it has attracted some other people who are hangers on and who are out in the community. And we want to do whatever we can to provide them services, or if they're violating the law, send them to jail. And we work with the city by identifying those people. But I think that it has got to be a city effort to try to get other people out on the street to help with those people that we just can't deal with and who aren't ours to deal with. And we're not creating the nuisance. They hadn't been on our property and gone off and done something terrible. They never come on our property because they're not allowed. So we're not a nuisance, but I understand your analogy. But the lawyer in me just wanted to make that clear. Legally, we are not causing a nuisance here. Because if you
This is
had,
actually, Councilor Garcia, if I might, this actually is a bigger question that probably shouldn't be directed to the shelter, but maybe to Kira, about all the things that the city is doing with regard to homelessness that should and have taken the pressure off of Pete's Place shelter, Pete's Place or the Interfaith Shelter, however you want to refer to it. And if it's okay, I think she should give you some of that context.
Yeah, and actually, thank you, Madam Chair. I was kind of going towards clarification from Kara in regards to, I know with our restructuring, it's going to allow for some hiring of some new staff that might be able to accommodate this resource or the need we see in the community. And so what potential plans might you have with this new flexibility with the restructuring, how it might be able to fill the gaps and support the needs we're currently seeing, not only in Harrison, I would say in the surrounding communities, because I think, on Monday it was mentioned it impacts District 1. Well, it also, Councilor Cassett Sanchez, it impacts District 4. I would argue it impacts the entire city. So I would think, how can we look at utilizing this restructure to provide those supports to those folks that might not be guests at the shelter and ensure that they're getting the supports they need, and we can help alleviate the pressure on the immediate surrounding communities and wherever else the ripples might be felt.
Madam Chair, Councilor Garcia, yes, thank you for the question about the reorg, because it is very relevant. I wanted to return to one point you made earlier about something that I think is relevant today, right now in the immediate. We've been working closely with Joe and his staff, who are very concerned because their census has to stay low during COVID, about what's going to happen for people, in the coming winter who have no place to go. So I just wanted to let this committee know that we have received agreement from the Salvation Army to act as a cold weather shelter over this winter, and that will go further to relieving the pressure on Pete's. I don't know about this, solution in the streets surrounding, but I think it's all to the good of not making one entity hold the bag, as it were, on everything. So that's just something I thought this committee might want to know. And of course, we'll be coming to council with that contract as soon as we have it. So to your question about the reorg, I think I don't know how many new staff we'll be able to hire with the reorg, since we didn't get a lot of new budget to hire staff, but we do have some. We are looking at being able to bring in some more social workers who can help with responses on the street. I think the idea that we need to get a really high quality of response to people who are basically suffering and making others suffer with their behavior on the streets is really where we have to think about targeting efforts. We have to look at all angles, and I'll leave that to some degree our new director, and as well as the task force, and working with all of us to really say, what resources do we have within these departments that are now coming together that might respond. I mean, a beautiful example of something the city did amazingly well was the MIHO project, right? And that was very effective, using EMS staff and to analyze that. So much of our 911 data has to do with man down calls, with behavioral health calls, and those folks on the MIHO team have that capability to go out. How to bolster that capacity, to really create that kind of street outreach that's going to make all the difference for people. So I think it's not necessarily, I have some ideas, but I think it'll be a joint effort. The task force certainly will be helpful in giving us some direction around that. And I think we have to look, though, at our existing resources and changing the way we've been doing things. I think I've shared this with you, spending $3.4 million not solving the homelessness problem every year. This is from data that comes from the police, the fire department, the parks department, and cleaning up campsites. How can we, really take a look at how we use our staff time, our other resources to address this holistically? And I don't want to impose too much on this committee, but we have a really great expert in our midst around how this has been done nationally. So, Madam Chair, if there's any opportunity to have Ms. Haggerty speak to this, I think it would be valuable for the committee to hear.
Yeah, thank you, Kira. I do, just so she knows, if she doesn't naturally fit into Councilor Garcia's questions, I do plan to make sure that we hear from her tonight. And I'm really grateful for her being here. And I think both the committee and the broader community understanding the Built for Zero program directly from her will be valuable in this overarching conversation. So again, Councilor Garcia has the floor, and we will be referring to Ms. Haggerty when it's appropriate.
Thank you. I hope I answered your question, Councilor.
You did, and I just hope that because if I'm not mistaken, we allocated $750,000 for services such as this, and I hope they haven't been earmarked already, because I think this is a perfect place where we can allocate some of those resources and have an immediate impact in the community. That's all the questions I have, Madam Chair. I just want to, thank you, Dan and Joe, for the great work you all do with the shelter. I think, as I mentioned earlier, the services you provide are critical, and it's not, we're not trying to eliminate those services, but I think the gist of what I'm hoping is we can strengthen that partnership, build a sustainable plan, and hopefully relieve some of the pressure off the community, and take some of Miss Haggerty's input and build a quality program where other cities can model after. So with that, thank you, Madam Chair. I'll go ahead and relinquish the floor.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Rivera, I know you don't sit on finance, just wanted to give you an opportunity if you had questions, and if you don't, we can go to Councilor Villarreal, and then I also have some.
No, I do. Thank you, Madam Chair. I do have a couple of questions. Either for Dan or Joe, really, how many full-time staff do you have at the shelter?
We have 4 full-time staff.
4 full-time staff, okay. You mentioned about meeting with neighbors and business owners. Do you know when the last time the meeting with business owners or residential neighbors was?
It was probably about a year ago. In our various agreements with the city is to call those meetings, and we come. And we've been at every meeting the city has called. And I'm just not sure exactly when the last meeting was. I have to tell you, Mr. Council Rivera, that in my experience, these meetings, unfortunately, have not been very productive. The neighbors come and they yell at us, and we don't work on common solutions. But I have been at every single meeting the city has called with the neighborhood.
Do you think it would help if meetings were more frequent?
I think it would help if the city provided the kinds of services we've been talking about tonight.
Which is, can you restate again, please, briefly?
Sure. Lighting and sidewalks on Harrison Street. Increased community policing on Harrison. Increased behavioral health services from the city and other providers. Coordinating better between the police, MIHO, LifeLink, street outreach to deal with the particular people causing all the problems on Harrison Street. Those are some of the things that I think can make a difference. And we've heard about problems even across the Rios and in other areas of the city. But Councilor Rivera, I want to be clear. Those are not shelter people. And those problems, the park on Camino Carlos Rey that Councilor Cassett Sanchez talked about the other night, there have been shootings in that apartment house right across the road from that for many years before there was ever a shelter. There have been problems in that neighborhood, in that park, and wherever Councilor Garcia is talking about. I mean, all the homeless problems in the city are problems, absolutely. And I want to encourage the city to work on those problems and people, but the shelter cannot be responsible for them.
All right, before I lose my train of thought, you said community policing. What do you envision, or what do you mean by community policing?
Well, in what we heard from the chief at finance was that the chief is going to put policemen on bicycles. And I think Councilor Lindell asked whether they could ride individually and not in a peloton. That was her words. And he assured her that that's how that would happen. And policemen who are getting off their bikes and talking to neighbors, being present on the street, getting to know the homeless people who are causing the problems, figuring out who they need to connect those people to in community services, or arresting them if they're on outstanding warrants. I mean, community policing, to my mind, means a fairly continuous police presence, not in a threatening.
So it's having our police department present. It's not so much the community watching out for each other like a neighborhood watch program.
Yeah. No. Thank you for that clarification. It's your police being in contact with the community. That's what I see community policing as, not as citizen vigilante groups or neighborhood watches.
So I did want to bring up neighborhood watch. We have one here in our neighborhood, and we watch out for people around us several blocks. And even though I don't have authority over other people's yards, the street, if someone calls and notices something, I will go outside and look around and see what's going on. That's what I think of community policing. It's the community helping out the police department in ways that we can to make sure that things are taken care of. Do you know how many people are not allowed in the shelter? You said there were several.
There are many. Joe, can you answer that?
Right now, I think the list I gave the chief was about 18 people, somewhere in that neighborhood. But some of those people are already working with the MIHO team. A few of those people are also working with LifeLink street outreach program.
And we hope that work will keep them off Harrison.
Yeah.
Are those people that have been residents in the shelter that are now not allowed, or they've just been a nuisance in the area?
Some are and some aren't. And just so you know, the people on the street actually have greater needs than the people in the shelter. So, and you know, Chief Padilla has said in the past, and Andrew, you could correct me if I'm wrong, you know, we can't arrest our way out of this particular problem. And so I think the people, you know, it's a coordination effort between the police department, outreach workers, the shelter itself, you know, and this whole continuum of services, you know, so in order to help those people, part of the exacerbation this year has been COVID-19. The problem has been more difficult this past summer, and I think primarily because people have no place to go. And that's been problematic for us, obviously, and for the neighbors, and which we're sympathetic to 100%. But it has been, I mean, we had a young couple who went over to the park on Camino Colas Rey and promptly got themselves arrested for no trespassing, and he spent the night in jail, she spent a week in jail. Because there's they were camping out on Harrison Street because there's literally no place for people to go at this particular point.
So you said one of the main missions that really created you was to prevent hypothermia death. So of those people not allowed, the 18, 19 people not allowed in the shelter, where do they go?
That's a very good question. That's what, you know, what Kira's talking about, working with the Salvation Army. It's not just our overflow this year with COVID, but yes, I'm not sure where those people end up going, to be perfect.
And then I think the porta potties have been removed, right? Since COVID started.
Yes.
Yeah, so I'm sure that's created some issues as well.
Yeah.
Dan, you mentioned that a lot of the people causing the problems are not shelter guests. Who do we think they are?
I think Joe's probably the better person to answer that, but the short answer for you, Councilor Rivera, is that they are people who have severe mental issues or substance abuse issues who can't even qualify for the bottom level of our shelter because they misbehave when they're in it. And that's largely who they are. Joe, who else are they?
I mean, part of the problem is that for many of these people, this social strata are people within the shelter. And that's why that's their socialization network. And in part, that's why they gather on the periphery of the shelter, because they do know people who are in the shelter. So that's problematic, 100%. And so that's why I believe many of them are there, but not all of them. Some of them, you know, have not spent a night at the shelter. The person who threatened the neighbor down the block that we all received the email from has never spent one night at the shelter. So you know, I'm not particularly sure where and why some of the people who gravitate toward Harrison Street in particular, as opposed to Jorgensen, do that. Not, you know, some of them, yes, we've put out, but what I said at Finance Committee meeting, we always give people alternatives so they don't have to be cold. We always tell them, go to detox. If you get thrown off the property, if you go to detox, this is an attempt that hopefully something might stick. It's obviously no guarantee. But if you go to detox, whatever they say, 3 to 7 days, we'll take you back afterward. And trying to encourage people and motivate people, you know, to change their behavior, you know.
And where is detox? When you send them there, where is that?
Well, we would send them to Santa Fe Recovery.
Okay.
All right.
All right. Thank you for that. I believe the fire chief is on. I wanted to ask him about the inspections that were done there.
I'm here.
Chief, when was the last inspection that was done at the shelter?
The shelter's last inspection was completed on October 1st, 2020, with minor violations. I shouldn't call them a violation. They have to provide documentation that their alarm system has been maintained, and they have to replace a exit sign.
Okay. And then when was the inspection prior to that?
That one was completed on November 30th, 2019.
Was that close to the time that the remodel was done at the shelter?
No,
Madam Chair, Councilor Rivera, I'm not aware of that. Because of the type of business it's considered an assembly, that requires an annual inspection. So I believe it was an annual inspection that took place.
Council Rivera, the inspection that the fire chief is talking about are the city's fire inspections they had annually. We had other inspections by the county and others when we did the renovations, and those renovations were completed in June and July. And we
Okay.
were fully inspected.
Mr. Yohalam, if you could please direct your response through the chair, and if we could just respect the counselor asking who he'd like to hear from, that'd be great. Thank you.
I apologize.
Thank you. That's okay. So, Chief, you said this is classified as an assembly, even though people spend the night. Are we looking at it in the right manner?
Madam Chair, Councilor Rivera, the information I received where I just shared with you about it being considered an assembly, that is the classification as our fire prevention unit has classified it. So I could follow up to make sure that it is classified in the right category, but as of right now, it is considered an assembly.
Okay. If you can look at that and just wondering why it's not classified maybe as similar to a hotel or a motel, since people do spend the night there.
Madam Chair, Councilor Rivera, just because I don't have the code in front of me, I will refer back to our fire inspectors and follow up with an answer.
All right. And then if you can check with CID or the county to see who did any other inspections after the remodel, that would be great as well.
I'll also follow up with that, Councilor Rivera.
All right, Chief Joy, does your department have the resources to continue bikes on patrol for a sustained period of time?
Chair, Councilor Rivera, it's Andrew Padilla here. I'll cover that.
Thanks,
so
Chief.
this Operation Tranquility will start October 17th and go through January 8th. We cannot sustain it. It's something that we're going to focus on now to give that business district and neighborhood some reprieve from the problems and concerns that are occurring there. But we can't sustain it 24/7 nor year long. But we understand everyone's concerns, and we're going to step up and help out. One concern that I brought up, a meeting that we had about over a month ago, was private security. I think, like I said, the city should definitely step up with private security and help out. We thought, hey, look, people understood me. Some others had some concerns about my thoughts on private security. If the city has the funding now through CARES Act funding or through CARES funding, I think we need to act on it now. We can't wait for this task force to stand up that you'll be chairing along with Councilwoman Villarreal. We'll still be talking about this same concern 60, 90 days from now if we try to bring up the concerns on how to spend that $750,000 for this security company. But we will definitely be there in the early mornings through the evening. But I think having a private security company to patrol that neighborhood and business district to deter and curb some of this behavior, I think we could jump on that as soon as possible so we can give that neighborhood and business district a break from all of these concerns. The police presence is definitely going to curb the behavior and push the actors into different parts of the city. We understand that, and we'll definitely step up and help here. But as we mentioned, outreach to these individuals is very important. But a security company will definitely help us in the evening hours, starting, like I said, from 9 p.m. to about 8 o'clock would be great. And then once we do pull out of the area in January, I think, like I said, we'll have to evaluate the whole area and concerns. But I think having the security patrol on a regular basis, 7 days a week, almost 24-hour coverage during that time frame when we do lift would go a long way.
Chief, and I heard the number 500 as the number of responses you've had to in and around the shelter. Is it this year or last year?
That high number that I gave the other day was from last year. And then
Okay.
to this year, we were already past 400.
Do we know what the cost is per call?
I don't have the cost breakdown in front of me. We'd have to determine how long we were there figure out hourly rates, figure out fuel costs.
Okay. And do you know what your average response time was?
We'd have to break it down per call. Depends if it's obviously someone armed with a knife or a firearm, a major crime in progress. Obviously, that would take priority and we'd respond within minutes. If it's someone that was urinating on the sidewalk, that type of situation may pen for 30 minutes or 3 hours, just depending on the call the time of day or how many calls for service are pending.
And that's where security could help out because they could respond in a more rapid fashion and get to the person before they're gone.
That is correct. And Councilor, that's what I was trying to get at. And some people thought that my thoughts on security was, well, hey, they're just going to do the same thing and call dispatch, and we're still going to have to wait for police to respond 30 minutes or 3 hours later. But what we want to do is with those regular patrols, they would be able to deter. And that's the number one thing, is we want them to deter the people from urinating or sleeping in an alleyway or on the side of the road, or thinking that it's okay to be on Harrison selling narcotics or using narcotics.
Okay. And I've driven by the shelter early in the morning when they're letting people out, and people have been crossing multiple lanes of Surios Road after the shelter lets them out. Have we responded to any pedestrian versus motor vehicle incidents around the shelter around the time they let people out?
Chair and Councilor, knock on wood, it's been a very safe year where we haven't had a lot of pedestrian fatalities in that area.
Good. All right, Chief Babcock, if I can ask you a couple more questions about calls, but how many, I think I heard 200 EMS calls in and around the shelter. Is that last year or this year?
Madam Chair, Councilor Rivera, in 2019, we had 298 calls for 2019. 2020, the same time frame, January to current month, we're down to 166 calls in the shelter. What we also have at the shelter, we have as calls as public assist, is our Mulligan Health opiate outreach or Thrive program. They go daily to the shower, to the shelter if a participant is in the shelter.
Okay, and are you aware of any pedestrian calls that we've had, in the last couple of years?
Madam Chair, Councilor Rivera, I would have to go into our data to look into it, so I didn't just throw out a number. We've had some pedestrians along Service Road, but not necessarily in the vicinity of the shelter.
Okay, and then lastly, I heard that behavioral calls or mental health patients are some of the biggest issues that we're dealing with around the shelter. If we were to respond with a social worker, a police officer, and a paramedic, and they came across somebody that was being difficult, how would they handle that?
Madam Chair, Councilor Rivera, right now we have draft protocols of what the medical personnel would be, the paramedic would have to deal with. Police department would have to come up with their protocol, so to provide scene safety for either the crew that's involved in that type of response, as well as the overall scene safety. So I don't have the draft for police response or their protocol. Then also just the social workers capacity. We want the social worker in that type of response to kind of get that individual to the right services. So not necessarily provide case management, but get him to the correct case management style, whether it's behavioral health or addiction or mental illness, whatever the case may be. That's what we want that social worker to do, and not actually provide case management.
So it's my understanding it's the nuisance people that are creating a bunch of the problems. So what are our options there? Either take them to jail or take them to the hospital?
Madam Chair, Councilor Rivera, if they are in need of medical services and they are unable to sign off as a patient refusal just because of capacity of being intoxicated or not being of sound mental status, then we would transport them to the hospital. Law enforcement would have to answer the question about when they're taken to jail. Again, Madam Chair and Councilor Rivera, as has been echoed throughout the entire conversations of these meetings, we could have hundreds of case managers out there, but at some point, case management needs to provide them into services, and that's where we're lacking. That's a link. We're lacking services. So I could have every fire department member be a case manager and street outreach, but we just don't have services to place them into that are appropriate for their needs.
So by services, you mean a behavioral health facility, a mental health facility?
Or addiction facilities. There's so many things that we have services that we are allowed to, not that we're allowed, that we have ability to take them to.
Right. And I remember when this first started, so a lot of it was to keep patients from hypothermia deaths, but the other was to really minimize the amount of patients that were going to the hospital, as well as minimize the amount of patients that were being transported. So has the shelter helped in any way in that regard, or do we still have quite a bit of traffic going to the hospital?
Madam Chair, Councilor Rivera, right now our MIHO program, due to staff, the services our MIHO providing is our MIHO program case manager providing opiate outreach and Thrive program, which is diversion from placing people in jail for some misdemeanor type crimes. So our responses to the shelter itself have gone down. Our opiate outreach team has, I think, made a big difference. Our Thrive program has made a big difference. That revolving door at the hospital is still taking place, and that's a little bit because we don't have the ability to continue to follow up with high utilization patients that that have used 911.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair. I think that's all I have for now.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Villarreal, if you have questions, I would like to go to Roseanne Haggerty if that would be okay. She is coming to us from a different time zone, which is a little bit later than where we are tonight. And I would like to have her address the committee. We have heard tonight that that this is a larger problem than the shelter's lease, and the folks in that neighborhood are in need of services beyond which this particular shelter can provide. And I think Roseanne is with the Built for Zero program, which is something that the mayor got us on track to be a part of and to implement here in the city of Santa Fe to address this very kind of thing. And if she could maybe give us a little background on what Built for Zero is, and the work that the success of this work maybe in other parts of the country, and kind of where we are in Santa Fe in implementing this. I think that would help this conversation in understanding what we are doing and will continue to do, and in terms of focusing efforts on helping the overall issue, which would help the neighborhood. And Roseanne, if you wouldn't mind giving us some context, I think that'd be great.
Of course, thank you, Madam Chair, and I so appreciate the opportunity to join you, and really appreciate the thoughtful conversation here. And as you just pointed out, this is a much bigger question around the whole way that cities can effectively actually work toward a systemic end to homelessness rather than be in a constant state of reaction to these very thorny problems. Built for Zero, that Santa Fe is a part of now, is a national effort that involves now 81 cities and counties. And it's aimed at really getting to an end game where homelessness itself is rare overall and brief when it occurs. And I'm struck even listening to you that so many comments have really appreciated that this is very much an individual phenomenon, that in a city of 80,000, there are about 120 people that are, that there isn't an easy solution for. And so part of what has emerged in this work that has proven so powerful and that we're very happy to have Santa Fe beginning to implement is essentially knowing people by name and working this problem down. Of the 81 communities We now have 49 that are steadily reducing homelessness. 13 have ended chronic or veteran homelessness. Another 4 have ended it, but within the last 3 months. And so we don't actually count it as having been done until you've held that and really have the tested systems in place for at least 6 months. But the trajectory is very clear. And what these communities are doing that are succeeding and what Santa Fe is putting in place step by step are 5 things. One, they are really shifting everyone's efforts across the community toward the shared aim of ending homelessness, as opposed to just keeping ahead of today's crises. And so they really have stepped back and say, what do we need to do? Pulling everyone around the same table. And secondly, they have created this nimble, flexible team of all of the key organizations in government and the not-for-profit sector. Third, and this turns out to be sort of the essential glue to it all, they have created an ability to know by name and in real time everyone experiencing homelessness. And so you don't have people falling through the cracks. You know precisely what's going on. And a lot of the information here goes to specific individuals and their behaviors. Well, that's sort of at the heart of like demystifying what's going on, taking the anonymity out of this situation. And then lastly, and 2 things that again, you're working on, and I just, kind of commend you in the midst of the pandemic and all these other pressures. One is having a flexible arsenal of resources, looking at freeing up resources in one place or another, finding assets like the work of the police and the fire department, and EMTs to participate here, putting money into housing that can be used more flexibly. Even I would say, we've mentioned to people across the country how just savvy and resourceful the city was in using the Midtown campus, just really finding ways to be flexible and going at the problem really with that kind of intensity and flexibility. And then lastly, drawing on a testable menu of strategies that have worked in other cities. And I know that Kira, for instance, has been working on an outreach program that has been informed by what other cities have done who don't have adequate funding for their outreach program, but can pull together a team from across agencies. So I think that you're heading in the right direction, and it kind of changing the paradigm from we just endlessly reacting to really getting organized to solve the problem. You're in the midst of that, and this is not a city without a plan that's tested and working elsewhere. I'd say these cities that have ended chronic or veteran homelessness, they're all larger than Santa Fe. Which is not to say that like they have abundant resources or their challenges are easier, but if you stay with that vision of we're solving the problem, we're not going to get thrown off course by the day's crisis. There is a path now, and Santa Fe is certainly helping other communities to learn as you pull resources together in your unique context. So happy to fill you in on any particular part of this, but I do want to appreciate the fact that the city is on this course to really solve the problem for good, and not to have month after month, year after year, these painful conversations about what to do with people who are suffering and causing others to suffer.
Sorry. Thank you for that background. And I really appreciate you joining us this evening. And I know it is later where you are. I think it's helpful to understand a little bit about what your program is and the fact that we are a part of it and we are working to solve some of these bigger problems. And, I just think that's important context. I don't know if there are quick questions for Ms. Haggerty while she's here. I don't want her to have to hang with us through the entire meeting if she's not able to, but if there are quick questions for her.
Madam Chair.
Councilor Villarreal.
I have one question for her. Well, I have a lot of questions, but thank you, Ms. Haggerty, for joining us and describing some of the work you're doing. And I guess what I'm curious is, have you seen in other cities that the provision of services and resources are all concentrated in one facility, Or have you seen it be more successful when there's different services, they're integrated and they're communicating, but they're not all in one facility, and that there's a need to kind of not spread out in terms geographically necessarily, but that there's different ways to tackle homelessness, and that having a shelter where the actual people sleep isn't necessarily the same place it should be where they're getting the services they need?
You know, I've seen so many variations, Counselor, of how communities organize and even spatially their resources. I think the thing that matters the most is the tight communication, actually having a very comprehensive, accurate picture of the problem. And that is the thing that is causing communities to, you know, make progress or not. And so the location, I've seen, you know, so many variations of this. It's really hard for me to be definitive because, you know, sometimes it depends like what types of services are clustered there. So be happy to follow up with Kira to suggest maybe some different city models that could be relevant, but there isn't a one size fits all answer to that.
Thank you. I don't really have direct questions anymore for Ms. Haggerty, but I do have
Okay, I know, and I will get to you, and thank you for your flexibility in allowing her to ask questions. I think Councilor Rivera has a question for Ms. Haggerty.
Thank you, Ms. Haggerty. Have you worked with any communities that have a cost of living similar to the city of Santa Fe, where they've been able to end homelessness? Because when you talk about affordable housing, the idea of affordable housing in Santa Fe is quite different than anywhere else. And even affordable housing here in Santa Fe is quite expensive. So have you dealt with any communities that have worked on that?
Yeah, I would say, Counselor, that three stand out because of their very high housing costs. Bergen County, New Jersey, which is just on the other side of the George Washington Bridge from Manhattan. So, you know, crazy high housing costs. And then two suburban counties just outside Washington, D.C., also a very costly area. So that's, well, Montgomery County, and then Arlington, Fairfax, Virginia, Montgomery County, Maryland, and Arlington, Fairfax County, Virginia. And again, it's, you know, the collaboration and actually understanding the problem in its particularity, every person, but making steady improvements to a system following the data. Like, what do we have to do this week? What do we have to do this month to work this problem down? And that's what those communities did, even in the absence of much affordable housing.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Other questions for Ms. Haggerty? Thank you so much for joining us tonight and talking a little bit about Built for Zero. I know we've had some meetings early in the mayor's administration to learn more, and I know that we are now part of your strategy, and you know, hopeful that we'll be successful like some of those other communities you speak of. So thank you for joining us. Really appreciate it.
It's my pleasure, and we're just very committed to your success as well. And my team and I just really are at your disposal to help with these challenges along the way.
Thank you. Councilor Villarreal, I think you said you had some questions, and again, thank you for letting me put Ms. Haggerty in between.
Sure. Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a question for Kira related to the Built for Zero program, and while you're formulating it and trying to create the infrastructure for it, do you have regular meetings with social services that are providing support for people experiencing homelessness, even chronically homeless folks? Are they already like in our network? Do you have regular meetings? What does that look like?
Madam Chair, Councilwoman Villarreal, yes, we do have a core team. We formed the core team when we first joined with our partners at Interfaith, St. Elizabeth, LifeLink, and we also, of course, partner with the New Mexico Coalition to End Homelessness, and we're considered the community lead in the Built for Zero model, and the coalition's the data lead. The first thing we did was go to the conference together in Atlanta and really understand the model. That was now almost 2 years back, not quite 2 years back. And we again went to a conference in Denver with our partners. And then I also was able to hire a staff person who had extensive experience working in homelessness, Anna Kale. She actually worked at the coalition. And she's really taken the role in as a project specialist and coordinating the efforts, although that's not her only job. So that's, you know, something that's challenging. But she has set up regular meetings with the people that sort of more on the ground folks, case managers, people doing street outreach. And those meetings have become a little less regular during the pandemic and while she was on maternity leave. But yes, we've set up a regular series of meetings. And we worked weekly with our data lead on the Built for Zero work.
Okay, so that core team that includes service providers, so Interfaith is an active participant in that effort?
They very much are, Councilwoman Villarreal.
And I ask that because it's important since they are one of the larger shelters and serve a great number of people. And they also, I think, have the experience and expertise to know what will make this successful. And I guess what I was having a hard time with before this particular model came about, in the previous administration, we had the one door concept, and that was an idea that we're considering, and all the service providers would come together and have meetings and talk about this potential. And there was a group, a model from San Antonio that came just to describe that. And I went to almost all those meetings, and Interfaith did not participate in that. And that was really frustrating because they had a big role in that. And I never understood why that wasn't the case. So I want to make sure that as we move into yet another model, which I'm hoping this one will stick, and it does really kind of track individuals and see them as human, but also follow them along and make sure that they're progressing or that they're getting the services they need. So I think that's a good thing. And I guess I'm curious if the shelter, since you've been open, are you able to quantify in some way with the individuals that you've served, how many people have found stability?
Madam Chair, Councilor, for sure. So last year, just so you know, by the way, in answer to, I believe it was Councilman Rivera, of the clients we case managed, 52%, we had a 52% reduction in incarceration and a 30.5% reduction in ER visits. But last year we housed between Lifelink, the VA, and people returning home or Pueblo, 127 people. And we sent 76 people out of the detox or recovery.
So are those folks then no longer utilizing the shelter?
Yeah, well, the people who are housed are not utilizing the shelter.
Okay. So I guess when I think about stability and I think about how we think about provision of services and being able to track individuals and find out if they're progressing and getting what they need. Kira, is that the goal then for Built for Zero? And also the goal of the, what are we calling it? The requiring our partners to be part of the contract. I'm forgetting the name.
Coordinated system.
Entry.
Thank you. Coordinated entry system. Is that actually part of the Built for Zero model?
Madam Chair, Councilwoman Villarreal, yes. The what's called the by name list, which is at the heart of the Built for Zero model, is the coordinated entry system working really well. And so what that means is that the reason that homelessness is then brief and rare is because we're able to see when people become homeless. We can even prevent people from becoming homeless. We're able to get them housed quickly because we know what their needs are, because we know who they are by name. And then if they have trouble staying housed, or are having trouble, we know that, and we know how they're leaving homelessness. Are they going out of the community? Are they going into housing? are they going to a family member, and what kind of help do they need moving forward to stay stabilized? So we're not there yet, but that is the goal of this highly functioning system. And Joe looks like wanted to add something.
No, I just want to, as an illustration, today, we're getting CARES money from the county, $200,000. And so our case manager, Clinton, called over to the Country Club apartments, which are low income apartments. Of the 60 people there, 30 are behind in rent and maybe be evicted. So we're going to help those people prevent becoming homeless before it even occurs. So I feel like we're making every effort. Clinton is calling numerous apartment complexes to see where we can prevent people from falling into homelessness before it even happens. So
Thank you, Joe. And that's also the goal of Connect, right? That and we are also giving CARES Act money to the shelters through the city. And that is a way to ensure that case management is happening, navigation is happening. It's not just a place to stay. That's really important. It's a place to stay out of the cold. That's for the majority of people, for those core people that are really having a hard time getting out of that situation. Those navigators are really sinking in and saying, like, what do these folks need to get housed? And it is very encouraging to see what they're able to do. And now with CARES, I think we're able to do more. And I think that is the ultimate goal of both the Connect program, which is kind of a wider feeder into coordinated entry for those who are homeless, as well as just all of us just getting around the same table, which we have been doing. And we've had, to some degree, having those hard conversations about, well, why can't your agency step it up and do this? Well, why can't do it because da 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 da, and why can't you do it? And where's the city and where's the county? And by the way, I just want to mention that the crisis center that the county is bringing on board, I think will go a long way to helping solve the problems that we see in the streets. Where do you put these people, even if they do get booked and into jail? We know they're back on the street the next day sometimes. Well, with the crisis center, which will have the Santa Fe Recovery Center, Sobering Center on site, and with a project we're really excited about that we're working on with Ancorum Foundation, who has really stepped into this field to say, we care about homelessness. We want to prevent that. We know it's an impact on our hospital system, on our community at large. And they've recently really stepped to the fore and become a real partner, offering a $250,000 bridge funding for this effort, where we're going to get more help for my coordinator, Anna Kale, to coordinate out of the coalition, as well as some support for case management, and then some funds that are to be determined in what they need to be used for. Maybe they can be used for street outreach, maybe they can be used for some of these immediate needs. But I think, it's taking time, but I think, St. Elizabeth and Interfaith, incredible partnership now that we didn't see maybe a couple of years ago, where right now, today, I know that Joe and Edward are case managing individual clients and seeing who could go from Interfaith perhaps to St. E's. Will St. E's be able to open up a little more on their restrictions to let more people in the cold weather? That kind of collaboration I did not see happening. I won't attribute it all to Built for Zero, certainly, but it's happening now. There's sort of a synchronicity to it. That's very encouraging, and I'll stop.
Well, I partly, actually, I think you're part of that success and the increased communication between different partners that we didn't have before. So I do attribute that to your leadership, Kira, as well. And I do think that center will be helpful as we look at behavioral health support. I guess when I look at this coordinated entry system requirement through the contract, and it's still, the minimum is 25% of clients. And you said that sounds about reasonable, but I guess I still would like us to consider increasing that each year, so that there's a goal to keep, not that we want more people and clients to be in that pool because it keeps growing, but that they, as a shelter, will continue looking at increasing that assessment tool as a goal for each year to be acquiring or having more clients into the system. So would that be something that we can add to that there would be a tiered system for the next year? So the first year is 25% of the clients, but I think that there should be some increase so that there's a goal that we need to reach for the next year.
Madam Chair, Councilwoman Villarreal, I think that is it's a very, the coordinated entry in HMIS is really complicated, and I don't want to get into a real wonky discussion of that. But there is a need to capture who's experiencing homelessness even for a night at PEDS. And that is not the same as coordinated entry. That's like a one touch point. And you know, that takes a lot to use the HUD database system, HMIS. That takes a lot of capacity that the shelter doesn't currently have. So I would say the lease is not really the mechanism to ensure that that happens, as much as perhaps contracts that come out of community services, looking at how do we perhaps bolster those if we want that kind of fuller participation in the data system. That's a whole staff person, honestly, for what it would take given the volume of 1,000 people to get everybody in that HMIS system. And it's something the shelter has tried before and been willing to try with some funding, but wasn't enough to cover what it actually took to do it. So very much we want everyone who's experiencing any form of homelessness to be sort of captured early on so they don't become a 12-month chronic case, right? And that is something that we're in a lot of communication with Joe and his team about. But I would just argue that the lease itself is not the best mechanism to get that kind of a deliverable.
That's fine, as long as through our grants and the matrix, not the metrics we're trying to achieve with the grants we give out and the evaluation aspect, I do think that that's something we need to strive for, that not just Interfaith, but all of our partners in that system, so that we really do have a clear understanding of who is chronically homeless in our community and keeping track of that. So thank you for that information. I'm going to move on to the aspect of like responsibilities of the roles and responsibilities of the shelter and what that looks like even outside of their premises. And, you know, I think we all have a role and responsibility, as I said in the finance meeting. And I think it would be extremely helpful to be able to have neighbors and neighborhoods be in this effort together, because when you have better communication with people that are experiencing what you're experiencing, or they have different, they are basically another resource, then we would probably do better about understanding what's happening out there outside of the fence. So I do think it's actually the responsibility, the shelter should have a responsibility to communicate with neighbors and businesses. And the last official community meeting was not last year, it was 2017. And that's a long time to be having a meeting. I know I had been pushing to at least have a meeting last year when we actually got funding for lighting and sidewalks. And I wanted to understand from the neighbors what they would like to see first, since we had limited money, and we're finally getting some more money to support that. But again, that's a short-term effort to a larger problem. So I do think the neighborhood actually can be the eyes and ears of what's happening in the neighborhood to the police and the shelter, and that there should be a concerted effort to talk to each other regularly. And I think in the past we'd relied on Interfaith to help organize those. And I think it's actually our responsibility too for the city to be able to do a better job at communicating with their neighbors, because the neighbors shouldn't find out about things through the paper. That's just not the right way to communicate with any neighborhood. We've already learned that. We see that on the council, and we've seen it in the past. And I think in this case, the neighbors have not forgotten that when the shelter was being considered in its current location, they were not informed that this was happening, and they had to find out through the paper. And there was actually one councilor that voted against this because of that fact, and that the communication was lacking so that people could understand what were the implications of having the shelter in their neighborhood. So yes, I do think that, and I'm trying to decide if that makes sense in the lease to have that kind of requirement, because really it's also our responsibility as a city and the police department to be able to have regular meetings. And I see it, having them at least twice a year would be very helpful, because then neighborhoods and businesses know what's happening and what we're working on and what we're working towards, and what are some of the nefarious activities happening, and who are those people that are actually causing them, because they may or may not be connected to the shelter, but they're regular people. I mean, they're people that actually are they don't change every week is what I'm saying. usual suspects that are out there doing similar things, creating problems for people that are trying to get services in the shelter, and also people that, they're emboldened, I would say. And part of it's also the role of our PD to continuously be there to be able to support. So I'm happy to hear about the bike team. And I think that again is a short-term fix, and we have to think about this long-term. So back to the security question, and Kira, I don't know if people have posed this question to you about private security, and I'm kind of conflicted about that. We put it on private security to decide and have that responsibility, and we pay for that as a city, or is that something that's a combined effort for the city and shelter to be responsible for? What are your thoughts on that?
Madam Chair, Councilwoman Villarreal, I'll just say that it's a complex issue. I think when we have capacity issues with our police force, I mean, in an ideal world, I don't think it would be private security, but that's my opinion. But if we really have capacities with our police force, and we're not able to, say, mobilize a larger MIHO team, then I think we need to look at, private security, certainly in the short term. And I will say that we are in conversation right now about, since we have this new Salvation Army site coming on, and we are having this CARES money, we're looking at also having kind of a roving security that would also serve the area around Pete's as well. And so I think that is a possibility on the near horizon. And I think we'll learn if that's really the way to go or not, by doing it and trying it. We have this CARES resource that we can use, and I think we're certainly looking into that possibility.
Yeah, I'm not sure how I feel about having private security take care of a problem that we also have a responsibility for. And so, yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure how I feel about that. I also think that the communication aspect and what Ms. Haggerty was talking about, the way things work well is when there's a comprehensive picture of the problem, and that there's communication between service providers. And so I don't know what kind of communication happens between and coordination with the police, LifeLink, MIHO, fire, and the shelter. Do we have an idea of how that works? Because I don't get that. I feel like we're at the point where we should be beyond that, and that we should have a coordinated effort and understand what's happening and sharing information. And so I don't know who can answer that. Someone can give me a better picture of that's actually happening, or we're still trying to figure that out?
I think that's a Kira question, isn't it?
Yes, I think.
Well, I mean,
it's part of the reorganization. It's part of rethinking how we put resources towards this problem, and how we think differently about, our resources and how we deploy them.
Yeah, Madam Chair, Councilwoman Villarreal, I mean, definitely, Joe is in constant communication with LifeLink. LifeLink is present at the shelter. Joe and Chief Padilla talk about, and Joe calls the police when there are police issues. The Thrive and MIHO teams are very present in the area. MIHO from the fire department. So it's happening sort of on a case by case as needed basis, but I don't know that there is a good systematic coordination of communication. And I think that is, something that the new department can address. I think what's kind of needed is also to involve REC 911 in the sense that, if we have a new way of responding to these needs, and that's hardwired into how REC deploys a unit, an appropriate kind of unit, then we start to see a different kind of flow for an individual. Ideally, an individual is having a behavioral health episode in the streets, whatever that looks like. The team, somebody calls 911, the team is deployed, and there's a social worker, a crisis de-escalation person on the team. I will mention that the county has also continued to invest in a mobile crisis response team, which is not currently active, but could be a player in all of this. The county has a large revenue source, as you know, for behavioral health in the community, and Santa Fe is its primary source for its spending. And then, you know, the person's assessed. If it's not an urgent medical condition, they're brought to the crisis center, they're stabilized at the crisis center. And if they don't have a home to go to, they go to this other facility, which is this, I'm calling it a transitional living / supportive housing place. And it could be it is a different place. And in fact, NCORM is in the process of identifying actual properties that would serve for this purpose. So we're really kind of close on this. We would then have that person stabilized, and hopefully, you know, housing does wonders for people often. That's, you know, housing first model. You'd be amazed. Behaviors that are taking place on Harrison Street are taking place in people's homes right now, tonight, as we speak. And
if I can interject, we have been at this almost 2 hours now. I have not asked any questions. And we do have another presentation tonight. I just would ask that we think about where we are in the evening.
Yes, you should have told that when the other counselors were talking too. Anyway, I have one more
question. That to me all the time, but you know, we all know what the agenda looks like. So it's a blanket reminder for us all that these are really hard issues. There's a lot of information to convey. You know, we're trying to do it as best we can, and you know, we could talk about this into the wee hours and still not be done. So anyway, it's not to call you out, Counselor.
Okay, thank you. I think Joe might be able to answer this. You know, I've been to the shelter before, and I volunteered there, and I've seen how you are set up in your facility, and you know, to have places where folks sleep, which is very close to where they're eating, and it's always been super dense and a lot of people in one space, and your offices are right there squeezed off to the side. I'm just curious because I've always thought there was a need to have more space, and then also curious about your provision of services. And I know you've tried to add services as needed. So I guess, Joe, I'm just curious what your take is about the space adequacy, the adequacy of the space you have. And obviously we hope that the homelessness won't increase so that you have more people that are needing the space. I'm just wondering, in terms of your space now, do you feel like you have the capacity to support what's needed?
Right now, we have plenty of space because we have first of all, most of the
I'm going to talk about pre-COVID.
Pre-COVID, okay. But I still think we have ample space. We are looking at this Build for Zero participation and hoping to decrease the population at the shelter. No two ways about it. And so, you know, I have 30 people at the motel right now, and they're all doing well. I have to say, not just fine, they're all doing well. And most of those people have been homeless 2 to 8 years. So when Kira refers to the housing first model and the city buying a motel, I mean, I think all these are efforts that we want to support, and that I think we will be able to make an inroad in decreasing the population at the shelter so that the amount of space we currently have will be ample. That's how I feel about it right now. You know, if things change and all of a sudden we have a large influx of people we never anticipated, then we can go back to the drawing board. But right about now, especially, and I know pre-COVID is what you're referring to, but right now, we're only going to allow 36 people in the building at night. We don't feed people in the building during the day. We feed them. We box lunches and distribute at the door. We only allow 10 people in the building at any one particular time, 2 in the community closet, 4 in the showers, because we have 4 showers, and 2 in each restroom. You cannot get in the building without wearing a mask or having your temperature taken. So right now, and the only providers in the building at this particular point are a clinician from PMS, LifeLink, and Healthcare for the Homeless. So we have ample space at this time, at this particular time. But I am hoping that all these efforts, I mean, I've always said that, I really want to put us out of business, and I do. And I think that, we've learned that you can house somebody who's been homeless for 8 years, and they can do just fine. And we're talking about people with mental health issues, I might add, primarily. So I think at this particular point in time, we're okay.
Thank you for that. And also, while I have you, Joe, are you committed to actually meeting with neighbors and businesses regularly? I know that was a discussion and promise in the past that has not been met. And the city also has that responsibility, but it's a partnership. So what are your thoughts on that?
Definitely, we're open to meeting with the neighbors, but I want to say that those meetings were organized by the city. We didn't organize them. We attended those meetings. So just so you know.
Well, it was kind of this weird idea of let Joe invite all the neighbors and people and stakeholders. Yes, this was a problem with our current director. That's why I'm glad Kira is with us, because there was a misconnection of having you all be the responsible party to put out the word that we have a meeting, and the city didn't play a major role, and that was problematic because then a lot of people got left out. So I think we need to do a better job with those meetings, and they need to happen regularly, and that we all are committed to that along with PD so that people understand what's happening.
Actually, PD held the last meeting, which was Coffee with Cops at Castro. That's who held the last meeting we had.
Yeah, and counselors, I don't think we're invited to that. So thank you. That's all I have for now.
Thank you. I would just offer that we as counselors have convening power and can certainly call all these parties together as we see fit and as needed to help address the issues in the neighborhood. I am not going to ask any questions because of the late hour, and I am going to ask that we move. I'd entertain a motion now on this item, and then we're going to move to our last presentation.
Move to approve.
Second. Jennifer, can you call the roll?
Yes. Councilwoman Renee Villarreal.
Yes, I have more questions, but I'm going to wait till the next space that I can ask.
Councilor Garcia.
Yes.
Councilor Rivera.
I'm going to abstain for now until I get some answers from the fire department.
And Chair Romero Worth.
Yes. Okay, thank you everybody for being here tonight. Thank you for all your input, questions, and good conversation. We will now move to the presentation item on our agenda, and I apologize to our staff who've been waiting, and thank you for your patience. We did not know we have this item on the agenda when we first scheduled you, so sorry about that. And let's see, we are now at the Environmental Services Division update on sustainability initiatives related to social equity. And I don't know who's going to start, but take it away.
Madam Chair, that'll be me, Neil Denton, the City Sustainability Planner. Thank you all for your time.
Thank you, Neil.
I'm happy to share some updates with you as it relates to social equity work. We've been very steeped in discussing for the last 2 hours, but specifically in the nexus of social equity work as it relates to sustainability and climate action. I have prepared a slideshow. Looks like I can share my screen here. Okay. So I'm going to be discussing 3 items today that relate to social equity and climate action. The first is the concept of climate resilience and how the city is leading with strategies to protect the most vulnerable. Then I'll briefly discuss our building codes and how some updates are increasing our efforts to ease the energy burden in low to moderate income households. And then I'll finish with an overview of the Equity Foundations training that we recently completed for city staff. You may already be aware that the triple bottom line is a guiding principle in our Sustainable Santa Fe plan. And what that means is, as you can see in this Venn diagram, it's where ecological resilience, economic vitality, and quality of life and social equity come together into that triple bottom line for us to analyze our decision-making and in our practices. Just to cover some key terminology, when talk about social equity or racial equity, that's defined as when race can no longer be used to predict life outcomes. Equality and equity are sometimes used interchangeably, but they actually convey significantly different ideas. Equity is about fairness, while equality is about sameness. We're not interested in closing the gaps by equalizing subpar results. When systems and structures are not working well, they're often not working well across the board. So many of the examples of strategies to advance racial equity are advantageous not only for people of color, but for all communities. So we are embedding equity in our climate planning and practice because we need to ensure our climate action benefits those who need it most. People of means may be more able to relocate or withstand climate impacts such as fires, floods, extreme heat. Due to a history of marginalization and disinvestment across the country and across the world, people of color, immigrants, refugees, and lower income populations experienced increased exposure and sensitivity to climate hazards and a reduced capacity to adapt. Preparing for climate change provides opportunities to address root causes of these disproportionate exposures and sensitivities to climate impacts, and allows us to enhance these priority communities' capacity to adapt. So when we talk about climate resilience, what we mean is the ability of people and their communities to anticipate, accommodate, and positively adapt to and thrive amidst changing climate conditions and hazard events. Resilient communities enjoy a high quality of life, reliable systems, economic vitality, and they conserve resources for present and future generations. Now, according to the National Institute of Building Sciences, for every dollar that we spend on increasing resilience for ourselves, the local government, and for communities, that has a 4 to 6-fold return on investment. And localized resilience measures can lower risk mitigation costs and increase creditworthiness for cities. Earlier this year, Kyle Mason added me to the Emergency Management Coordinating Group so that I can help with the climate change knowledge and action, and also provide a social equity lens to our hazard mitigation. I spent some time making revisions to our hazard mitigation plan, which was already very good in terms of climate change and prioritizing those who experience the impacts more than others. But by being included in that group, I'm able to advance the conversation around climate resilience, and it's been a very fruitful partnership with Kyle and now his team. By putting key language in the hazard mitigation plan, which is required by FEMA and the state every 5 years, it makes it easier for us to get funding from FEMA for grant programs like their Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities grant program that's they're currently accepting applications for right now through January. Also, a part of the hazard mitigation work the Office of Emergency Management does is mitigation outreach. And one really effective tool for our mitigation outreach is called the Game of Extremes that was developed by the Urban Sustainability Directors Network. Some of you, I know it's been a lifetime since April, but some of you may recall we had a climate resilience training planned in April for our staff and elected officials so that we can help people better understand the vulnerability and risk facing our community from extreme events that are going to be, continue to be intensified by the changing climate. What you see here is the game board, the Game of Extremes. I was trained this last fall as a trainer to facilitate this game where people basically take on a role. They might be a HOA representative, they might be a transportation planner, And the people that come to the table, they're asked to take on a different role so that they can get more familiar with a different perspective. So what you see here, the sort of water looking lines coming up is flood waters. The bright red areas is where it's going to get hotter. And as you go through this game, you assess the hazards, you identify vulnerability and risk, and you develop climate resilience actions based on a specific budget. And it helps people really get familiar with the limitations of budgets. And it gets really difficult when you're trying to decide between prioritizing the senior center or the daycare or the power plant. And it really helps participants understand the challenges that cities face when dealing with climate mitigation and hazard mitigation. This is specifically designed for local governments and their partners to train staff and engage communities in efforts to support climate resilience. And it promotes incorporation of climate resilience and equity considerations into day-to-day activities, as well as proactive planning efforts. Earlier this year, we were able to do a game of extremes with Santa Fe, the Santa Fe Master's Program class at the community college. I imagine you're all familiar with it, but just in case, it is an early college charter high school that happens at the community college. And we were working with a film class on a project where they were making videos showing how others in the community feel about climate change, how others in the community are doing their part to reduce climate change and adapt to its impacts. And it went really well getting the students involved in the hard decision making that local officials and community-based organizations have to deal with. Another item that we were advancing that was somewhat put on hold, it really does have to happen in person, the concept of resilience hubs. These are community serving facilities that are augmented to support residents, coordinate communication, distribute resources, and reduce carbon pollution while enhancing quality of life. They're based in trusted community serving facilities, whether that's a recreation center or a faith-based institution. In some cases, it's even someone's household that members of the community are comfortable with. And these hubs, they can be activated to serve vulnerable communities without overloading local governments. That's one way in which they're really effective. They provide an opportunity to consider communities' social, economic, and physical needs in the normal or everyday mode, which in turn enhances their ability to anticipate, accommodate, and more quickly recover during disruption. They're a way to solve multiple different problems in all three resilience modes, those being normal life, disruption, and recovery. They do so by enhancing community cohesion, building trust, and enhancing quality of life. So when the Resilience Hub is in normal mode, it provides a home base for residents, businesses, and organizations to gather for workshops, events, meals, and training opportunities that benefit a range of community needs, including resilience. They function in the normal mode most of the time, meaning there are no hazards present and all critical infrastructure is available and functioning properly. And then when disruption happens, they also act as centers for preparedness, response, and recovery. They switch from normal mode into reacting and responding to the disruption, and they enhance operations to better support immediate community needs. So with your enhanced systems and capacity, hubs can ideally help reduce the needs of emergency services and better connect residents and businesses with supplies, information, and support during the disruption. Then for the third mode, they transition to recovery after disruption. Hubs can play a critical role in post-disruption recovery and ongoing community needs. The same inequities frontline communities experience before and during a disaster tend to impact their ability to recover, let alone thrive after a disruption. So hubs can act as centers for resource deliveries and distribution, access to support and assistance for complicated processes, such as filling out relief or insurance forms, and locations to access support services for trauma. They can also be central locations for external partners to gather and support recovery services, such as conducting needs assessments, damage assessments, interviews with residents, and collecting data. Both in their contribution to preparation and their ability to provide services during the recovery phase of a disaster, resilience hubs reduce the need for services from other entities such as public safety, hospitals, and relief organizations. So this is something I've been discussing with Kyle Mason, and we'd really like to perhaps bring in some grant funding and engage in conversations with community-based organizations about how and where Resilience Hub would be suitable for Santa Fe. But it is, in my opinion, it's very important that this happens in person. So when or if we're at that point, we really want to advance this concept within Santa Fe again. The Urban Sustainability Directors Network has developed a guide to really walk us through it step by step. At this point, I'm going to transition to a brief discussion about our building codes and go through how upcoming changes to the building codes will ease the energy burden of low to moderate income households. So this is a graph that was put out by the American Council for the Energy Efficient Economy in 2016. What you see here, the dotted line is the median for all cities of the energy burden measured as a percentage of household income that is paid for energy. The gray line shows low income. And the other lines you can see here correspond to different ethnic and racial groups. And the energy burden that is experienced by low-income households is twice as high as the median. So that's really where we are getting into the social equity component of our building codes. We've had the single-family green building code since 2009, and since then, every year it's been saving 17 million gallons of water and 1,400 metric tons of emissions for those households and helping them save money on their utilities. So this is our pathway to carbon neutral for our building codes that I imagine many of you are familiar with. Since 2006, we committed to adopting the U.S. Conference of Mayors Agreement to increase our fossil fuel reduction standard in new buildings with the schedule that you see here, 60% in 2010, 70% in 2015, and so on, to ultimately achieve carbon neutral buildings in 2030. And this goal was reiterated in 2017, which Councilor Villarreal was a sponsor on, and also restated in our 2018 Sustainable Santa Fe Plan. Right now, Dee Bangert, who's unfortunately left the city, had revised the single-family green building code to be applicable to multifamily. And she kind of passed the baton to me, and I've been working with land use on helping, make that happen. I've learned just yesterday that they're making progress on filling that green building code specialist position. They're going to be able to post it this month, and then once that person is brought in, Jason Klug informed me we'll be able to advance that revision to expand the green building code to multifamily dwellings, where we'll really see more of that impact of easing the energy burden because of more low-income individuals in multifamily residences. Another element that's very important is the state construction and industries CIC. Sorry, I'm drawing a blank on what the C is. Construction Industries Commission approved adopting the 2018 International Energy Conservation Code, which is going to reduce the energy use in new residential and commercial buildings by about 25%. We were 3 code cycles behind. This is an international code that cities can choose and states can choose to adopt or not. And so we've missed 3 code cycles under the prior state administration. So it's pretty monumental that this was just adopted by the state, and it's going to apply to new buildings in Santa Fe. And that means it's essentially going to equal a HERS score of 61. Our requirement for single family buildings is that they achieve a HERS score of 60, and lower is better. But basically what this means is our green building code will essentially be on par with all new buildings in New Mexico. So that elevates the urgency to continue on this path to carbon neutral and to have a conversation about the fiscal and feasibility impact of lowering that HERS score at this time. Also wanted to let you all know we were recently accepted into a Rocky Mountain Institute residential solar cohort, which is a peer learning cohort to help us increase residential solar energy and reduce that energy burden, specifically in historically marginalized communities that have had more barriers to accessing solar energy than other communities. Part of this cohort is that we bring a community-based organization to the table. It's starting next week, and we're still working on identifying that community-based organization, but we hope to be able to pull it all together and advance adoption of residential solar energy in historically marginalized communities by doing what's called community bulk purchasing, where we negotiate lower prices by bringing enough buyers to the agreement. We'll have to negotiate that with a financial institution. It's going to be hard, and that's why I'm glad we have help from the experts at Rocky Mountain Institute, where they've tested this in other communities, and it's been shown to increase residential solar adoption by 2 to 3 times from the baseline. Lastly, I want to discuss this Equity Foundations training we just put on for 5 staff through July and August. This is a training designed to begin building capacity to advance social equity here. It was developed by the Urban Sustainability Directors Network, the Government Alliance for Race and Equity, and the Center for Social Inclusion to help local governments apply an equity lens to their projects. I just wanted to point that out because a couple of those organizations, the Government Alliance for Race and Equity, the Center for Social Inclusion, they're really leaders in effective social equity strategies nationwide. This training, it was divided into the 2-hour workshops that we did once a week with this 5 staff members. As you can see here, we start with the opportunity for government to advance racial equity and using Seattle as a case study. Go into communicating about equity by looking at narratives, framing, and messaging. And then we work on key terminology and building a shared understanding of equity. We're really getting into the meat of it and using an equity lens in our work and implementing racial equity tools. And then workshop 5 is about building racial equity teams to ensure effective implementation of the racial equity tool. The 5 employees that went through it were Andrew Erdman, our water conservation specialist, Charlene Sitton, the Environmental Services Division Director, Elizabeth Camacho in Economic Development, Melissa McDonald, who's now our Interim Parks Division Director, and Carlos Gamora, Senior Land Use Planner. And Carlos was actually here at the meeting wanting to say something about his experience in the training, but he emailed me that he had to sign off. And so unfortunately, he wasn't able to provide his experience. Here is a real quote from one of the participants in the training. This person emailed me and just said, "Thank you for making this possible," and that this person has started making headway ensuring equity is part of their work. Added that it made this person feel more empowered when navigating the conversation. We did surveys after each training, and all the participants said they now better understand key opportunities to normalize, organize, and operationalize racial equity, that they better understand how to talk about race and race-based inequities in a manner that advances racial equity, and that they better understand how to build organizational capacity to advance racial equity here. Because this training was developed 5 years ago in 2015, it does not directly address the current racial equity conversations, just for example, around like monument removals and the conversations that are happening nationwide around racial equity. But it is a good basis for local government employees to build a foundation of understanding how decisions impact different communities, and to develop the tools they need to evaluate these decisions in light of disparate and unintended consequences. Also, the Urban Sustainability Directors Network is updating the training right now for better alignment with current events. So if we offer this again, it might be an updated version. The real meat of the training is this racial equity tool designed by the Government Alliance for Race and Equity. And this is a high level look at it. There is a PDF that we can take a look at. It's 40 pages long or so. And each of these questions has sub-questions that can be asked to analyze our policies and our practices. But at its core, the racial equity tool, we ask these questions. What is the policy, program, practice, or budget decision under consideration, and what are the desired results and outcomes? Then we need to be data-driven. What's the data? What does it tell us? We need to ask, how have communities been engaged, and are there opportunities to expand engagement? And then analyze who will benefit or be burdened by the proposal, and talk about what our strategies are for advancing racial equity or mitigating the unintended consequences. Then lastly, laying out the plan for implementation. So in this toolkit, each of these questions has sub-questions you can ask yourself to help guide through the process. An adapted version of this tool is currently being used by the city of Albuquerque. We very likely need to adapt it to not be overly burdensome for our processes. We have written up some proposal for city management, and we're in discussions right now about what and how we're going to advance this conversation in Santa Fe. One last thing I wanted to let you all know about is I'm participating in a grant program funded by the Urban Sustainability Directors Network, where I'm working with 10 other cities and Kauai County in Hawaii. You can see the cities we're working on here on refining a framework to transition our climate planning and action to better lead with people and make sure those who are most impacted by the changing climate are the ones who receive our services first. This wheel you see here is kind of the framework for the guide we're all working on together. And hopefully you can see it all right. It's designed to be dynamic. It's very intentional that it's circular. The initial framework that was developed by these same cities in 2018 was linear. And then after much discussion, it was decided this is more of a circular process of you do your internal organizing, you build your racial equity team first, then you move on to getting familiar with community dynamics, setting a shared pathway with the community, co-developing actions. When it says at the nexus, that means mitigation, resilience, and equity. So co-developing our actions with the community, partnering in implementation of those actions, reflecting, learning, and progressing, and continuing around that process. And this guide will have lots of resources for us to refer to. Our climate plans and projects are only successful if all people are prioritized at the center of solutions we design. Something that's really interesting about this program is we do actually have access to equity coaching from some national experts, and we are intended to test the framework, to be the beta testers here by participating in this. It's just finishing up. We were going to do an in-person convening earlier this year, but instead it's been broken up into a number of workshops, and we're doing the last one next month. So I'm really hoping this helps us advance our Sustainable Santa Fe plan strategies while leading with equity. That I'll stand for questions. Thank you all for your time.
Thank you, Neil, for your presentation, and sorry about the hour. Councilor Villarreal, you have your blue hand raised.
I just want to say thank you so much, Neil, for this. I know we've talked about this and ways to share what you all are doing in your work related to sustainability and making equity a prime pillar of the work you do. And so this is exciting to see this presentation. It might be something that we can I guess move forward, that you and I have talked about, this potential presentation that a national organization wanted us to be involved in. So I think this might be something that we could consider. And just really excited that you're part of the hazard mitigation or mitigation outreach team. That's like makes complete sense to me. The fact that hazard mitigation and our plan for it really does involve people and how equity plays into that. So that's actually very promising, and I'm very happy to hear about that. And then related to the resilience hubs, so I guess from my understanding, these are spaces that have not yet been established. Is that correct?
Correct. We have not established a resilience hub with the framework established with that guidance. You know, there are facilities in Santa Fe that people might describe as something like that, and they come to the top of the list as prime candidates for us to play a role in hardening the structure, maybe with solar plus battery storage. So when there is a disruption, there's still power there. So I do not think we need to start from scratch, but it depends on the certain neighborhood. It would really be best at a neighborhood level if the residents tell us where they want to go, because this is somewhat, the idea is it's somewhat in reaction to there's a catastrophe, you have to evacuate, and no one wants to go to the high school gymnasium and sleep on a cot. So it's important that it's where people want to go, where they're familiar with. But no, we have not done any work on the Resilience Hub yet. If COVID didn't happen, we might have some progress to report on that.
Right. Yeah, it sounded like you were thinking of hubs for normal times and then also for emergency response, preparedness, and recovery. So maybe COVID does actually help us inform us as to where these hubs could be located and what the like mutual aid groups are doing and where they're delivering resources and such. So maybe it's also both, like we don't have an ability right now to gather, but to kind of just be aware of what's happening now with, and how Food Depot is a big piece to the puzzle, and other neighborhood areas and community centers. So that's just something to keep in mind, but I think that's a great idea.
Madam Chair, Counselor, that's a good point, and I just want to add, we were discussing with Earth Care last week, who's been working on that mutual aid, about distribution networks and hubs, in hopes of that informing this effort.
Excellent. That's great to hear. And happy to hear about the building code updates as it relates to multifamily housing, and that we're actually filling that position that we were concerned about when we talked about it during the budget hearings. Although I wish we still had the person that was in that position, but hopefully we can find somebody with as much experience. And just excited about the Equity Foundation's training and the Government Alliance to Racial Equity. And I found it interesting that you were saying that, that this could be actually applied to other departments, not just yours and the team that you said were able to participate. Because I brought up the same issue to the HR director about what Albuquerque was doing around racial equity and kind of leading that effort and actually investing in it. And they basically made an excuse saying that they didn't think had funding for that. And I was thinking, now that you were talking, that you all could actually be part of the training, like train the trainer and be part of that. So I'm hoping that that's the conversation you're talking about. You may want to mention that I was concerned about this, that we do need to move in this direction, and we don't need to create a new department just for this effort, that you all have a foundation to start with, and that we could actually have other departments fold into that and be part of that training effort. So let me know how I can help with that, because I think it's important. And even if it's just like basics, like basic terms to understand racial equity and systemic racism, and understanding those terms and then how they apply to our work would be very important for all departments and directors. So let me know how I can help with that, because we don't need a bunch of money to actually make it happen, in my opinion. So that's all. Thank you so much for your presentation, and thanks for being patient to be able to stay with us tonight. That's all.
Thank you, Counselor. And I just do want to add, human resources is a part of that discussion I mentioned, and it's all very fresh as of yesterday. So thank you for your support.
Other questions from the committee? Seeing none. Thank you, Neil. Again, completely echo Councilor Villarreal. Thank you for staying with us tonight, and for coming back to flesh out some of the stuff you touched on the last meeting. So thank you. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure, Madam Chair.
Okay, we are now, let's see. back to our regular screen. Are there matters from staff?
None tonight, Madam Chair.
Great. Matters from the committee?
I got
Councilor
one, Madam
Garcia.
Chair. Thank you, Madam Chair. I just also want to thank Neil for presenting tonight. Sorry, I didn't get my hand up quick enough. Great thorough presentation, and I really thought there was lots of great info for us to move in a positive direction. But on the topic of presentations, I think we really need to ensure that they don't take precedence over committee work. You know, I think would be a bad path for us to go down if we get in the habit of saying we need to rush questions because it's a long night and we still got presentations to go. So I don't know if maybe limiting presentations to 15 minutes, that way we don't get into that pressured situation. You know, I know sometimes a particular legislation or whatever it is comes before us and we might be able to touch it twice. I know there's the instance of one of our colleagues only has the opportunity to touch matters in front of committees once. I mean, and so I don't think it's appropriate for us to get in that habit of limiting debate on particular topics, especially on something where it really has a lot of community input behind it. So I don't know if that's a possibility to limiting presentations in the future to 15 minutes, because I think it really does a disservice to the committee business that's in front of us if committee members feel pressured that they have to hurry and ask their questions because we've got a presentation later, which should not take precedence over the committee business. That's all I have, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
On that-
Other questions,
On that point,
comments?
well, just on that point, I think, yeah, not limiting time to talk about topics or issues on our agenda, but at the same time, presentations, we don't want them to be cut short either. So I don't know if there's a way to, knowing we had an addition to our agenda with this already complex issue with the lease of the shelter, and then realizing that it probably would take long and then asking staff to maybe do the presentation at the next meeting. I don't know what the balance is, because I don't like to shortchange our staff either, that have put so much time into their presentations and also information that really is important for us to know as well. So I don't know what the balance is, and I know sometimes it's not always planned. So I don't know, I guess, Chair, just to be cognizant, if we have these items that sometimes get added, maybe we just tell staff that we'd like them to present at another meeting. I don't know, it's hard to say, because I don't know what the future meeting is about or what you all have had planned, so. But thank you, Councilor Garcia, for bringing that up.
Thank you for the comments. Other comments from the committee? I think we're on to matters from the chair. I have none, except that our next meeting is, Jennifer, help me.
21st.
21st, thank you. And with that, we are adjourned. Thank you, everybody. I think it was a good conversation.